If you want the book or would like to read it, there are copies available on the table at the back of the worship area. We really can only cover some of what the book does. The book goes into much more detail than we have. So far, we've talked about how one of the basic ways to understand the entire story of the Bible is as a big, giant circle. That God made the world and the human race to be one way, to live in love and harmony, and to work together and to partner together. And then through our own choices, we fell away from that. We broke from that. And we have all suffered the consequences of that. And God's purpose in the world, God's purpose in human history, is to return the world and the human race back to what he originally intended. We spent the last 2 weeks talking about what it looks like to be unsafe people, to have unsafe people around us, and what the damage can be to us by the unsafe people in our midst. I will say, for those of you who were here last Sunday, thank you very much for being willing to do what we did, which was kind of be reflective and identify some of the wounds that we have been dealt by the unsafe people in our life, and even more so, how we sometimes have been unsafe to others and what that has looked like. When I read through the little cards that you filled out last Sunday, I will say it's very insightful that most people here would say that the people who have wounded you the most in your life are people who would be labeled critics. People who have been judgmental to you or looked down on you or held you to a high standard, made you feel small or demeaned you because you didn't live up to their expectations, etc. And also, most of you identified yourself as critics. That's insightful too. It made me wonder, by the way, if it's not a peculiarity or a uniqueness of American Christianity that we tend to create critics. My opinion would be yes, we do. So there's a little something we talked about last week. Actually, it's going to come up this week too, since now I know what you said about yourself. For the last 2 weeks, this week and next week, we're going to talk about how you can begin to be purposeful or intentional as a person to live in a more safe way, to be more of a safe person, to even choose to have safe people around you. And now you understand that this is not just a good, healthy, interpersonal choice. It's actually you deciding to partner with God in his redemption of the human race. That's how big it is to choose to become a safe person, to take steps toward becoming more of a safe person. I'm going to give you 3 verbs over the next 2 weeks that will summarize what we're talking about. Today is going to be the first 2 verbs. Next Sunday we're only going to deal with 1 verb because it will take us that long. If you and I choose as Christians, if you and I choose as human beings, if you and I choose as a church to try to be safe people, then one of the words that we need to learn is the word limit. We need to learn the word and put into practice the word limit. Now, this has a very specific reference. Limit has to do with the unsafe people that you will inevitably interact with in your life, who may already be in your life, who may already be close to you in your life. The key word for you about those people is the verb limit. Let me give you 2 key ways that in order for you to be a safe person, you need to limit your relationships with those people. First, you need to have wise or appropriate, quote-unquote, boundaries with the unsafe people in your world, in your family, in your workplace, among your friends. Now, boundaries is a word that maybe you've heard before. It's fairly commonly used in modern psychology. But I'd like to show you that actually the practice or the principle of having boundaries is very biblical, even if it's not called that. Here, in fact, is the man himself practicing appropriate boundaries. This is from the end of John chapter 2. Jesus has just caused a big ruckus in the temple. He has thrown out the merchants from the temple. He accuses them of profiting off of people and not making God's temple a house of prayer. He then continues to teach as he taught and work miracles as he worked. And the crowds in Israel 2,000 years ago were fawning over Jesus. They adored this remarkable Galilean rabbi who said things they never heard, who did things they'd never seen before. And this was Jesus' response. We are told at the end of John chapter 2 that Jesus, for his part, would not entrust himself to the adoring crowds because he knew all people and needed no one to testify about anyone, for he himself knew what was in everyone. Jesus' relationship with the crowds had limits. One of the limits that Jesus had on his relationship with the crowd is he didn't trust their adoration for him. Wise move, by the way, because the same people a couple of years later are going to kill him. He didn't trust them. He loved them. He gave himself to them. He ministered to them, sure, but he did not trust them. He also, if you're familiar with the story and the life of Jesus, you would find the same kind of boundaries that Jesus put in place in his relationship with the religious leaders, called the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Yep, he had very strong boundaries in place with them. He knew who they were, and he knew what not to expect from them. Interesting case in the story of Jesus is we're told the same thing about Judas Iscariot, one of his own followers. That Jesus knew who Judas was, and he knew exactly what to expect and not expect from that man, who ultimately would betray him. This is a biblical model for the concept of having a boundary or limiting a relationship with an unsafe person. And what's a boundary? I think the best definition I've ever run across is the one up on the screen. An appropriate relational boundary with an unsafe person is when love motivates you to realize you have to limit the relationship because it's in both parties' best interest. This is not mean. It is not spiteful. Love prompts you to realize, yeah, there need to be limits on our interaction, on how close we are, because in the end, it's actually in both parties' best interest. Let me give you a couple of examples. My daughter, who is not in here right now and is in the youth group, so I will use her as an example, has a friend at school who is very near and dear to her and is really bad at keeping secrets, like abysmally bad, like F- bad at keeping secrets. And my daughter has been burned by that on a couple of occasions. And so recently, Shiloh had something positive happen. Sadly, it was about a boy. That Shiloh had to think, I wonder if I tell this friend. And Dad had to say to Shiloh, you and I have had that conversation. This friend of yours that we will call Nicole, you can love her. She's all kinds of fun. She's the kind of person that you cannot have a bad day around this person. She's full of life and funny. But Shiloh, you should not trust her. And you know that from your experience with her. You know that you need to have a boundary of not telling her this secret because you know exactly what's going to happen. And to her credit, I think she listened to her old man this time because I haven't seen her break down in tears again because her friend spread a secret about her around school. Yeah, there are people in your life that you need to handle the same way. You can't trust them. You can love them. You can appreciate them. You can enjoy your time with them, but you can't trust them. There are some people in your life that you should not be vulnerable with. You cannot entrust them with the hurts of your soul or the joys of your soul because either they haven't earned it or your past experience or observation of them tells you they won't handle it well when you do it. This is an appropriate boundary to have with an unsafe person. The one that is probably will be the most universally helpful is this simple boundary. You need to ask yourself in your relationships, are you allowing somebody else to make you responsible for things that are not your responsibility? Here's how that shows up. You're in a friendship, you're in a family with someone who makes you believe that they cannot be happy unless you make them happy. Yeah, that is an inappropriate expectation in the relationship. That's impossible. You cannot measure up to that standard. Love would tell you, God would tell you, it is wrong for that person to have that expectation of you. If you are in that position, it is now incumbent on you to realize there is only so much that I can do here. I am willing to own my part, but I will not let you make me think that your personal happiness hinges on me. That is too far. That is a boundary I must put in place. For those of us who are critics, or live with critics, or know critics, as I said at the outset of the message, now we know that's part of our DNA as a church. You know how that looks. The critic will tell you, even if they are your spouse or your child, even if they are your best friend, the critic will let you know when you are not measuring up to expectations. And your response to that very well could be to give them power that is not rightfully theirs. They criticize you, or they nag you, or they needle you, and their unspoken expectation is, you need to do things my way, bub, or I will not be happy with you. I will withhold my love or approval from you. I will withhold my touch from you. And you, being the one who is trying to be a safe person and create safe relationships, needs to realize, I am giving that critic way too much power in my life. You cannot control whether or not they choose to be critical of you. You cannot control whether or not they choose to be judgmental of you, just like Jesus couldn't control the reaction of the crowds. But you can control what you believe is your responsibility, and you can control what you know is not. Sadly, there are people in your life you are never going to make happy. You realize that, right? And the more you bend over backward, the more unhappy they seem to be. And you have a few good days where you do make them happy, but they are short-lived, and the expectations ratchet up. That's because you have relationships where you have poor boundaries. You are allowing people to expect of you things that are not your responsibility. You know how the serenity prayer goes, right? It is one of the most important things you as a human being will ever be able to figure out. It's deeply important to your spiritual health. In this case this morning, it's extraordinarily important to your relationship health. Can you tell the difference between the things that are your responsibility and not? Can you tell the difference between the things you can change or should change or shouldn't? This is crucial in safe relationships. Yes, I know what I'm saying to you. Let me make it explicit. There are people in your life that you are close with, that you spend a lot of time with. There are people in your life you consider good friends because you enjoy their company or you share a hobby. And I'm telling you, there needs to be limits on some of those relationships. This could be someone you live at home with. And the most loving thing you can do for them is to put a limit on the relationship, to put a boundary on the relationship, because you've allowed them for far too long to manipulate you or control you or coerce you through their unsafe behavior. It is the most loving thing you can do. You see it? You have to have appropriate boundaries. Now here's the other important part of limiting your unsafe relationships. Do I talk to the unsafe person about it, or don't I? We all have them. Let's acknowledge that. Every single person in the room today has a significant relationship with a coworker, a friend, or a family member that is somehow pretty strongly unsafe. It bears the characteristics of an unsafe relationship. I am sure of this. So all of us, to one degree or another, even today, face the question, do I talk to the unsafe person about it? Well, here are two very confusing proverbs put right next to each other. But the point is abundantly clear. These proverbs, collected by King Solomon 3,000 years ago, say very clearly and obscurely, on occasion, you need to talk to a fool about his foolish behavior. And on other occasions, you shouldn't talk to a fool about his foolish behavior. Okay, so which is which? How do I know? Seems to me Solomon's point is, on occasion there will be times when you need to do one, and on occasion there will be times when you need to do the other. How do you know the difference? How do you know whether or not you should talk to an unsafe person? Here's probably the single most important question for you to answer in that regard. Do you think they are willing or able to have the conversation with you? Do you think they are willing and or even able to have the kind of conversation that you know you need to have with them? Because some people are not willing for you to have the conversation with them about how the relationship is off or unhealthy for you. Or there are ways that in the relationship it is not mutually beneficial. You know as well as I do, some people would be impervious, even defensive or angry about that kind of conversation, right? Some people in your world have never had a conversation like that in their life. And they set their life up so that they don't have to. They don't want to talk about how we hurt each other. They don't want to talk about how we aren't sometimes good for each other or encouraging for each other. They wall themselves off, and all they do in every relationship they have is talk about superficial things, trivial things, talk about things they want to, but it never gets beneath the surface. It never gets down to, oh yeah, what's really going on between us? Are we good for each other? Are we encouraging each other? Are we uplifting each other? I don't doubt for a minute that there's one person in your life who fits that profile. It is human beings at their worst, choosing to run away from the organic relational fabric that ties us together. Are they willing or even able to have the conversation? How you answer that depends on what you do next. If you think you can have the productive conversation with them, then you need to invite them into a dialogue. You shouldn't indict them. Do you know the difference? Here's how not to have the conversation with them. Someone has done something that was hurtful to you, or they broke your trust in some way, or they made you feel small or demeaned in some way. You feel anxious around them and at risk around them, and you think, okay, I think I can try to have a conversation with them about this. The way not to do it is for you to sit down at your computer and write a 3-page email in which you list every single grievance that you have against them. And fire that sucker off and expect them to understand with crystal clear clarity every single solitary word of what you meant in that email. Yeah, that is not how to do this. It is not to meet with them and get angry, even though your feelings have been hurt, for those of us in the room who actually have feelings. Right? It is not to allow your emotion about the situation to be channeled toward them in an extremely hurtful or negative way. That is not how you do it. And it is not to walk into the conversation assuming you're right. Here's what you know is right. They made you feel bad. They hurt you in some way. What they did or what they said, what they didn't do or didn't say was something that you took in a way that was not good for you. That you can have an accurate, crystal clear assessment of. Here's what you don't know. What they meant to do. What their intentions were. You don't know until they tell you. So please do not walk into the conversation and indict. Do not assume you understand, which is why you have to invite. You would say something like, hey, can we get coffee sometime? There are just a couple things in our relationship that I don't know that this is working for me. Or there are a couple things that have happened between us that don't seem like they've been good for either of us. And I want to hear what you think about it. I want to see if you see things the way that I do. The only way the conversation is going to turn out well is if you go in with that kind of openness and humility. Otherwise, there's no chance. But of course, there are people in your life where you simply can't. You need to know now there are people in your life, unsafe people in your life, who bear the earmarks of being an abandoner, a critic, or an irresponsible. Those are categories from last week. Who aren't going to listen to you, and you know it. Then you shouldn't have this conversation. Because their wellness, their own spiritual development, their own growth as human beings can happen independent of you. You may not be the person that God uses to have this conversation. It may not be the right time. And you need to take the long or the big view. You need to entrust them to God's faithful care. He is their shepherd as much as he is yours. He cares for them as much as he does you. And that means if they really are stubborn and their heels are dug in and their ears are closed to the damage they're doing to you and others, God is going to go out of his way and he will tirelessly work toward making sure someday they realize that what they're doing is damaging to everybody, including themselves. It's not on you to do it. It may be 5 years from now. It may be 15 years from now. It may be a friend in their life that they haven't met yet who will be the person who can do that for them. I had a conversation with somebody this week about a relationship in their life that fits that profile. And the sad fact is they realized, A, this is an unsafe person for me, and I see it now, and B, I can't talk to him about it. Because they will make me pay an extraordinary price if we talk candidly about what's gone on between us. And so I said to that person, okay, if that's what you believe is the honest truth, now what? We need to entrust that person to God's care. You need to decide what you can and cannot do in your relationship with them. You can care, but you don't have to trust. You can love, but you don't have to be vulnerable. What can you do? What shouldn't you do? And then we need to leave it in God's hands. Can you do that? The best way I've heard this first verb about having boundaries and deciding whether or not you will talk to people about the unsafe behavior that has gone on between you and them is this little line from a blog I read this week. You need to realize that there are some people in your life you have to love from a distance. Yeah, that's what this is about. You have to love them from a distance. Here's the second verb. If you want to become more of a safe person, if you want to create safe relationships in your world you have to limit. The other thing you have to do that we're going to talk about this week is you have to prioritize. Let me just give you a couple of ideas here. First, you probably need to evaluate, maybe even re-evaluate, the people that you are trying to invest time in, who you're giving your relational energy to. And biblically speaking, what you need to do is give your time to people of character and not necessarily affinity. Here is what you need to do. You need to become observant about the people in your little part of the world. Your little part of the world would include your family, both immediate and extended. Your little part of the world would include people in your church. Your little part of the world would include your friends and coworkers in your workplace. Your little part of the world would include your online friends, your fellow parents of kids at your kids' school. Whatever your part of the world looks like, that's who I'm talking about. And you have to become observant of who the safe people are. On the yellow sheet on your chairs today, there is a summary about what a safe person looks like, how they act. And you need to become observant of who those people are. Because they're out there in your world, you may just not have seen them. Or you may have been more innately attracted to someone who looked like you, had the same interests as you, was your same age, was your same socioeconomic bracket, and etc. See, if you look at that summary on the yellow sheet, note what a safe person looks like. And you can tell this by just observing people, listening to people. You don't ever have to ask them, hey, are you like this? Are you a safe person? If they are, you're going to be able to tell. On the list, you'll find things like, a safe person is known by being a person of great grace. They carry themselves that way. They emphasize forgiveness. They understand that everybody comes with their own warts and their own weaknesses. They themselves are very willing to admit that about themselves. This is what safe people do. This is how they sound. You'll note safe people have a tremendous positive effect on the people around them. A safe person is an influence for good, an influence for love, even. The safe people around you want you to be your best. They appreciate your uniqueness and peculiarity, and they want you to be that. Moreover, they want to help you become more like the person God made you to be, and in fact, more like Jesus. This is what a safe person sounds like. This is how they conduct themselves. You will see them treat other people that way. That's the key. And then what you need to do is say, okay, when I look at the people that are around me in my life, I see these three safe people that maybe were flying under my radar. And now I need to adjust the people that I invest in significantly, with whom I am purposeful relationally. And you don't even have to tell them why. You can just say, hey, would you like to come over to my house on Saturday and let's watch a football game together? Not, right, sorry to bring up bad things to all of you, right. I may have been watching that game when that happened. Right, I'll let it go. You say to that person, hey, can we, our kids are going to be at an after-school program for an hour together. Why don't we go get a donut? Let's get to know each other a little bit. Simply because what you have observed. You need to pick the people that you invest in. You need to pick the people you choose to be close to. You need to pick them based on their safe character. You would be amazed how you can have friends who are extraordinarily different from you, but very close and trusted because of their character, not their affinity for you. They may not be a lot like you at all, but that safe character proves to you the kind of friend they can be to you. I'd like to show you a biblical example of this. And it is an extraordinary biblical example. One of the landmark biblical friendships that we have is from the Old Testament between the son of Israel's first king, whose name is Jonathan, and David, who would be Israel's second king. They didn't really know each other. Jonathan grew up as a king's son in the royal home or abode, very rich, very powerful, very influential, as you might guess. Jonathan was, in fact, ancient Israel's hero. He was their military hero and their political hero. This is the guy that everybody loved in that culture. And then you have David, who was probably the son, he was the son of a rural, agrarian, farmer/rancher type, probably middle class at best. Jonathan and David didn't know each other. In fact, David, who was a gifted musician, played in the royal palace for King Saul, Jonathan's dad, whenever Saul was in a bad mood. But I'll bet you Jonathan didn't even notice David. Didn't even know his name. But then you come to 1 Samuel 17. 1 Samuel 17 is the famous story in the Bible of David and Goliath. Israel is being beset by its perpetual enemy, the Philistines, and they have a giant named Goliath. And every soldier is petrified of Goliath, except for the shepherd boy, David. And David says, I'm going to take my sling and I'm going to walk out there in the middle of the valley and I'm going to do that sucker in with God's help. Sure enough, that's how the story goes. And Jonathan, who didn't know David from Adam, responds that way on the screen. Jonathan, Saul's son, immediately after his first experience with seeing David and the kind of young man that he was, says to David, I'd like to make a covenant with you. This is Bible speak for a relational promise, a commitment. I want to be friends, but I really want to be like contractual friends, like I mean this, like I am binding myself to you. Why did he do that? He didn't know the guy. He knew enough. He knew enough that when the entire Israelite army decided, yeah, I'm here to fight, but not that guy, Jonathan saw the one guy who was willing to have enough faith and courage to walk out there and slay Goliath. And Jonathan said, I want that kind of friend. And so he walks up to David, gives him these great gifts, by the way, if you read on in verse 3 of 1 Samuel 18. But he immediately makes a relational commitment, a friendship commitment to this person he really didn't even know, except his character. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Who are the safe people in your life? Can you observe and see who they are? And then you need to begin to take the initiative to develop a relationship with those people, which means you may need to switch where some of your time goes. And of course, we do have to say that part of prioritizing safe relationships, part of prioritizing becoming a safe person, is deciding to be a part of a safe people. In this case, a safe Christian people. In this case, we call that church. I said to you the first week of this series, you have to see church in the bigness for what it is. Church is the primary vessel through which God will redeem the world. Jesus started this movement, We Are Jesus People. It is now our responsibility to partner with God in the remaking of the world. And part of how we do that is to remake the human race and how we relate to each other, to return it to God's initial design. This is what we do when we have friendships with each other. This is what we do when we live together as a connected community. This is what we do when we encourage those who are down, when we celebrate with those who are up. It is no less than the remaking of the world. You need to care about that as a Christian person. You need to commit to being part of and to be actively participant in a safe church. This is a deal breaker for me. I don't have a lot as a pastor. I refuse to pastor a church that will not choose to be safe. I will not do it. Which is funny because my first experience with you as a church was not very safe. But you need to understand that my commitment to you is so that you could become safe. And I am glad to report that you as a church are remarkably more safe today than when I first got to know you. I hope that you feel that way. And I hope that you have the same commitment that I do, that you can be gracious and open about a lot of things, but this is a deal breaker. We will be actively pursuing being safe for each other, or I don't want to be a part of it. Do you agree? On that yellow sheet on your chairs today is also a description from the book of what a safe church looks like. This is what we're talking about, doing together, being together. And it looks very similar to what a safe person looks like. Now think about it with some specificity with me. Think about the particulars a little bit. On a typical Sunday morning like this, what would distinguish a safe church? Well, see, a lot of that, right, is under my jurisdiction, or Ben's, because we are the ones who do a lot of the talking on Sunday morning. And you better believe the decisions I make about what I say, or what series we do, or what we emphasize in the services are made through the lens of, will this help us be a safe church for each other? Yeah, absolutely. But see, you play a part in it too. What do you expect from each other? What do you expect from me? What do you expect from Ben? I'd like to give you the right. I'd like to give you the place now and forevermore in whatever church you call home. When you show up, you expect to show up to a safe church that talks in a safe way, that makes you feel like maybe the rest of your world and all the people in it, even the place you call home, is risky, undependable, a place where you could get hurt, but not here. Yeah, you have the right to expect that. And moreover, you need to be a part of actively helping your church do that. But now you understand, see, actually, the conversations you have with each other before church, after church, in the middle of church, whispering to each other during my messages, I get it, it's okay. Yeah, this is you reinforcing to each other our commitment to be safe in the way that's on that yellow sheet. That we emphasize forgiveness and grace. That we never compromise biblical truth, but we talk about it in a way where it is accessible. We talk about it in a way where it is not just for super saints or super Christians, it's for all of us, and all of us are remedial students at best. We talk about the real joys and the real hurts of life. This is what we do. This is how we're safe for each other. But see, you can see with me that actually any church, any group of Christians who wanted to be committed to being safe, can't just do it on Sunday morning. In fact, the real grist of it is going to happen Monday to Saturday. A lot of what I do, you hear on Sunday morning. A lot of what Ben does, you hear on Sunday morning. And I do hope that the both of us are creating a safe environment here, that the words I choose sound safe and gracious, like Christ himself. That is the standard that we should hold me and him to. But the responsibility largely shifts from Monday to Saturday. It is now your responsibility to be safe for each other, to come alongside one another, to encourage one another, to take the initiative with one another, to commit to one another, to prioritize each other, and on down the line it goes. I'm not sure you can be a safe church. I'm not sure you can be a part of a safe church if you don't have that Monday to Saturday commitment to each other. Do you? And of course, now you can see why I'm not sure what you think about churches having small groups, what we call here groves. But now you understand what they should be. I get it. I know what they can be. Some can be very social. Some can be Bible studies. Some can be book studies. Some can be, thank you, someone just whispered the book that their group is studying. They can be a group where you get together and play games together or go to a movie together. All this is good. But here's the bar. The bar is when we gather Monday to Saturday, when we are intentional about being together as a church, part of what we're doing, a huge part of what we're doing, is choosing to be safe for each other. And maybe for the people in our grove, they don't have any other safe place in their life, but they have us. And you're right, it takes time and investment to grow in safety toward each other, but this is the bar. When on that yellow sheet you read the two middle sections and it describes what a safe relationship looks like, you are, in so many words, reading what our small group should be like. And don't accept any less. This is why it's so important that we think you are in one of those groups. If you're not, let us know. We want to find you one. It's probably the only way you can experience interpersonal safety in church in a very real way. So here are the first two verbs that you and I need to keep in mind about how we can become more safe as people. These are the two things that we need to keep in mind if we want to have safe relationships in our life. You have to learn to limit, and you have to be willing to prioritize. I'd like you to take a moment or two here at the end of the message, and I'd like you to give God the space to personally apply those two principles to your life. Who is it in your life? What unsafe relationship do you have in your life where you need to apply a healthy, wise limit? Where is it? Or how do you need to begin to maybe prioritize a little more? Finding and committing to safe people so that they can be safe for you and you can be safe for them. Would you take a minute? Give God a minute in the quiet to speak to you about that, and then I will pray for us all.